Avoidance is often mistaken for indifference, yet at its core, it is a sophisticated defense against emotional overwhelm. When someone withdraws after intimacy, the surface narrative suggests they do not care enough to stay connected. But the deeper psychological truth is more complex. Many avoidant individuals learned early that closeness can feel intrusive, unpredictable, or suffocating. As a result, they developed distance as a way to regulate themselves. This distancing is not the absence of attachment, but a strategy to manage it. Understanding this shifts your perspective. Instead of personalizing their retreat as proof of your inadequacy, you begin to see it as evidence of their internal conflict. They may feel connection, but connection activates anxiety about losing independence or being emotionally consumed, so they step back to restore equilibrium. The more intense the bond, the stronger the impulse to create space. This pattern can be confusing because their behavior contradicts the warmth they once showed. Yet within the psychology of avoidance, this contradiction is consistent. They are not fleeing you as much as they are fleeing the vulnerability stirred within them. When you grasp this, you stop chasing clarity from someone who cannot yet provide it. You begin to recognize that their silence is less about rejection and more about self-protection. That realization becomes empowering. It allows you to respond with composure rather than panic, insight rather than impulse. And in doing so, you shift the entire dynamic, because understanding dissolves the need to react. No contact creates silence, but transformation creates impact. Many people believe that simply disappearing from someone's life will automatically make them unforgettable. Distance can certainly interrupt a pattern, yet distance alone does not alter the emotional blueprint that existed between you. If you step away while internally remaining attached, anxious, and focused on their reaction, the energetic dynamic remains unchanged. The avoidant may notice your absence, but they will not feel a profound shift. What truly registers in the psyche is growth. When you use that silence as a period of reconstruction rather than strategy, something deeper happens. You stop measuring your worth through their responses. You stop checking for signs, interpreting pauses, or imagining conversations. Instead, you begin to refine your character, your boundaries, and your self-respect. This inner shift subtly rewrites the narrative. The avoidant expects pursuit, resentment, or emotional pressure. When they sense none of that, when your withdrawal feels calm rather than reactive, it unsettles their expectations. They may not immediately reach out, but internally they register the difference. Human beings are attuned to changes in emotional posture. When your silence is paired with visible stability and quiet confidence, it communicates that you are no longer orbiting their decisions. This is what creates impact. It is not the absence of contact that lingers in memory, but the realization that you evolved beyond the dynamic. In that evolution, you become someone they cannot easily categorize or dismiss, and that unfamiliarity leaves a deeper imprint than mere distance ever could. The psyche remembers what it cannot resolve. When a connection ends without true emotional closure, it does not simply disappear from the inner world. It lingers, not always in conscious thought, but in subtle impressions, unfinished questions, and quiet reflections. An avoidant individual may appear to move forward quickly, resuming routines and restoring distance as if nothing significant occurred. Yet the human mind does not discard experiences that stirred depth. If a bond challenged their defenses, awakened vulnerability, or exposed unexamined fears, it becomes psychologically incomplete. What is incomplete seeks understanding. This does not mean they will openly admit confusion or longing. Often, the avoidant copes by minimizing the importance of the attachment. Still, the unconscious records what the conscious mind attempts to dismiss. When you exit with dignity rather than chaos, when you refuse to create dramatic endings, you leave behind a calm but unresolved presence. There was no explosion to justify detachment, no clear narrative to reduce you to a mistake. Instead, there remains a question mark. Questions endure longer than arguments. The avoidant may recall moments of safety they struggled to tolerate, conversations that hinted at depth, or the quiet strength you displayed when stepping away. These memories resurface because they were never fully processed. The mind circles back to experiences that hinted at growth but were abandoned out of fear. In this way, you are not remembered for chasing or pleading, but for representing a doorway to intimacy that required courage. Even if they choose not to reopen that door, the awareness of it stays with them. The psyche does not easily forget encounters that exposed both its desire and its resistance at the same time. When you begin to individuate and reclaim your center, you quietly disrupt the old dynamic. Individuation is not rebellion, nor is it emotional withdrawal meant to provoke a reaction. It is the process of becoming psychologically whole, of standing firmly within your own identity rather than defining yourself through another's presence. In relationships with avoidant individuals, there is often an invisible imbalance. One partner reaches for reassurance while the other preserves distance. This creates a cycle in which your emotional energy becomes oriented toward maintaining connection. But when you turn inward and begin strengthening your own foundation, something fundamental shifts. You invest in your values, your work, your friendships, your inner discipline. You respond instead of react. You choose calm over urgency. The avoidant, who once felt subtly pressured by expectation, now senses autonomy on both sides. This is unfamiliar terrain. They are accustomed to dynamics that confirm their belief that closeness leads to dependence. Yet your grounded presence contradicts that belief. You are connected to yourself first. This change cannot be argued or explained. It must be embodied. And when it is embodied, it alters perception. You are no longer seeking to be chosen. You are choosing yourself. That quiet sovereignty unsettles the old pattern because it removes the tension that once justified their distance. In reclaiming your center, you do not chase transformation in them. You model it within yourself. And often it is this self-possession, this calm self-awareness that leaves the deepest imprint. Mystery born from self-containment speaks louder than pursuit ever could. When someone is accustomed to emotional intensity, repeated explanations, or constant availability, they begin to predict your movements. Predictability creates comfort, but it also reduces curiosity. In dynamics with avoidant individuals, overexposure often reinforces their instinct to withdraw. They feel watched, expected, or subtly managed. Yet when you practice self-containment, not as a tactic, but as a natural expression of inner stability, you shift the tone entirely. Self-containment means you no longer narrate every feeling, nor do you seek reassurance through constant contact. You process your emotions privately, with reflection and maturity. You allow space without dramatizing it. This creates a quiet mystery, not rooted in manipulation, but in depth. The avoidant senses that there is more within you than what is immediately visible. Curiosity arises where pressure once lived. They cannot easily define your emotional state, and because they cannot define it, they think about it. The human mind is drawn toward what feels meaningful, yet not fully accessible. When you are grounded and composed, your silence feels intentional rather than wounded. That distinction matters. Silence born of resentment closes doors. Silence born of self-respect leaves them slightly ajar. In that subtle opening, memory lingers. You are no longer chasing their attention. You are directing your energy inward. And in doing so, you become less available for analysis and more present in quiet strength. This is the kind of presence that echoes after conversation ends, because it was not loud enough to dismiss nor needy enough to ignore. Emotional self-sufficiency disrupts the expectation of dependency. In many relationships with avoidant individuals, there exists an unspoken assumption that the other person will eventually lean harder, ask for more reassurance, or seek constant validation. This expectation reinforces their internal narrative that closeness inevitably leads to pressure. When you demonstrate emotional independence, not through coldness but through stability, you quietly challenge that belief. Emotional self-sufficiency means you can experience longing without collapsing into it. You can care without clinging. You can value connection while still maintaining your own routines, ambitions, and inner balance. This steadiness is powerful because it removes the dynamic that once justified their distance. They may have told themselves that they needed space because you required too much. But when you require nothing beyond mutual respect, that explanation loses strength. You are no longer attempting to secure your worth through their attention. Instead, you anchor it within yourself. The avoidant senses this shift, even if they cannot articulate it. Your calm reactions, your measured responses, and your absence of emotional volatility create a new atmosphere. There is no chase to escape, no dramatic tension to withdraw from. In this environment, their old defenses feel less necessary. They may still keep distance, yet internally they recognize that something has changed. Emotional self-sufficiency does not force them closer, but it removes the illusion that intimacy equals loss of freedom. And in that removal, you leave behind the impression of someone who could stand beside them without leaning, someone who chose connection freely rather than from need. That memory often endures longer than any plea for reassurance ever could. Becoming whole forces them to confront their own fragmentation. When you begin the work of integrating your fears, healing your insecurities, and accepting both your strengths and your limitations, you radiate a quiet coherence. There is less internal conflict within you, less desperation to be validated, less impulse to control outcomes. This inner integration changes how you show up. You listen without overreacting. You speak without hidden agendas. You set boundaries without hostility. For an avoidant individual, this can be deeply unsettling. Their strategy has long depended on distance to manage unresolved parts of themselves. But when they encounter someone who is no longer fragmented by anxiety or self-doubt, the contrast becomes clear. Your wholeness acts as a mirror. It reflects back the areas they have postponed examining. You are not accusing them, nor are you demanding change, yet your grounded presence quietly exposes the gap between avoidance and growth. People can dismiss criticism, but they struggle to dismiss example. If you remain reactive and wounded, they can justify their withdrawal. If you evolve into stability and self-trust, their narrative weakens. They may respond by retreating further, or they may experience moments of reflection they cannot easily silence. Either way, the encounter leaves a mark. You represent what intimacy could feel like without chaos, without pressure, without emotional volatility. That possibility lingers. Even if they choose familiarity over transformation, they cannot entirely forget the experience of standing near someone who had done the inner work. Wholeness does not guarantee reunion, but it guarantees impact. And often, the deepest impact is not in dramatic gestures, but in the quiet realization that they met someone who had become internally aligned while they themselves remained divided. What awakens the unconscious cannot easily be forgotten. In every meaningful connection, there are moments that move beyond ordinary interaction. A conversation that feels unusually honest, a silence that feels safe rather than empty, a reflection that touches something long buried. When you connect with an avoidant individual at this depth, you may stir parts of them that have remained dormant for years. These are not surface emotions. They are older fears, hidden longings, and unexpressed vulnerabilities. The conscious mind may attempt to minimize the experience, labeling it as temporary or impractical. Yet the unconscious does not operate through dismissal. It records intensity, resonance, and emotional truth. If your presence encouraged them to feel seen without pressure, challenged without judgment, or understood without being controlled, that imprint settles beneath awareness. Even if they withdraw to restore distance, the awakening remains. The psyche is drawn back to what once expanded it. This does not guarantee that they will return or openly acknowledge the impact. Avoidance often protects pride as much as fear. Still, memory is shaped less by duration and more by depth. You may have represented a rare moment where closeness felt possible yet frightening. That paradox is difficult to erase. People often forget those who chased them, argued with them, or tried to persuade them. But they rarely forget those who quietly illuminated a hidden part of themselves. When you move beyond no contact and focus on becoming grounded, aware, and internally steady, you leave behind more than absence. You leave behind an awakening. And awakenings, even when resisted, echo within the psyche long after the external connection has ended. Detachment with dignity alters the emotional memory they carry of you. When separation happens in chaos, with accusations, repeated messages, or attempts to force clarity, the final impression becomes tangled in tension. That tension allows the avoidant to justify distance. They can point to conflict as evidence that withdrawal was necessary. But when you detach calmly, without hostility, and without pleading, you leave a different imprint. Your absence is not filled with noise. It is marked by composure. This composure challenges the simple story they may tell themselves about why things ended. Instead of remembering you as overwhelming or demanding, they are left recalling your restraint, your maturity, your ability to step back without retaliation. Emotional memory is shaped by the final chapters of interaction. If those chapters are steady and self-possessed, they linger with unexpected weight. The avoidant may not immediately process this shift. They may even interpret your calm as indifference at first. Yet over time, the contrast becomes clear. You did not collapse. You did not attempt to control the narrative. You respected yourself enough to walk away when reciprocity was uncertain. That kind of departure is difficult to dismiss. It suggests strength rather than rejection. It invites reflection rather than defense. Dignified detachment communicates that you valued the connection but valued yourself more. And when someone realizes they encountered a person who could love without losing self-respect, the memory settles differently. It becomes less about escape and more about what was quietly lost. In that realization, your presence is not associated with pressure, but with balance. And balance, once experienced, is not easily forgotten. The final key principle is that what lingers most is not possession, but presence. Many believe that being unforgettable requires constant reminders, visible displays, or deliberate pursuit. Yet the deeper truth is subtler. Presence leaves a mark when it touches the psyche in ways that cannot be easily dismissed. When you interacted with an avoidant individual with authenticity, composure, and emotional depth, you created impressions that operate beneath the surface of memory. These impressions are not about being seen or acknowledged at the moment. They are about being felt. They resonate in quiet reflection, in fleeting thoughts, and in subtle emotional echoes. When you step away and evolve, you amplify that presence. The energy of growth, calm, and self-possession communicates more than words or gestures ever could. Avoidant individuals, trained to minimize closeness and to protect themselves from dependency, are sensitive to authenticity and coherence. They may outwardly maintain distance, yet the awareness of what they encountered lingers internally. They cannot erase the example of someone who could hold themselves fully while offering connection without anxiety. That example challenges their habitual patterns and remains lodged in the unconscious. It is in this indirect, enduring effect that true memorability resides. You do not need to force recognition, elicit response, or provoke longing. You need only embody integrity, self-respect, and emotional independence. Over time, these qualities create a lasting impression precisely because they are neither manipulative nor contingent on their reactions. They are reflections of your evolution. By focusing on presence rather than pursuit, you transform the dynamic into one of internal resonance. The avoidant may never openly articulate the impact, yet it will shape their perception of connection, intimacy, and emotional possibility. That is the essence of going beyond no contact. You no longer exist in their life as someone seeking, pressing, or waiting. You exist as someone who awakened awareness, mirrored calm, and demonstrated what wholeness can look like. And what awakens the unconscious, what models emotional integration without clinging, is rarely forgotten. This is the power of presence. It does not need to return to be remembered. It lingers quietly, shaping memory, reflection, and the subtle sense of what was once possible. In this you leave an enduring mark, not through action, but through the depth of who you became while stepping fully into your own life. The journey beyond no contact is ultimately a journey inward. It is not simply a tactic designed to make someone notice you. It is an invitation to cultivate self-awareness, resilience, and presence. When dealing with someone who is avoidant, the tendency is often to focus on their behavior, why they withdrew, why they resisted, why they seemed unreachable. Yet, true influence arises not from scrutinizing them, but from refining your own inner landscape. By centering your attention on growth, reflection, and emotional integrity, you transform absence into a space of power rather than uncertainty. Your energy shifts from reactive to intentional. You no longer define your worth through their responses, nor do you allow your attention to be consumed by speculation. Instead, you engage in practices that deepen your understanding of self, strengthen your boundaries, and clarify your priorities. This inward work creates a subtle but profound ripple effect. Avoidant individuals are often highly attuned to energy, tone, and emotional stability. When they encounter someone who has moved beyond dependency and operates from a place of centeredness, it resonates unconsciously. The impact is rarely immediate or verbalized. It is absorbed in the quiet awareness that the other person is no longer bound by old patterns, that they have evolved while maintaining calm and composure. This presence challenges their habitual avoidance, not by confrontation but by example. It models what connection could be when approached from self-sufficiency rather than need, from maturity rather than chaos, from wholeness rather than fragmentation. Over time, the memory of such presence lingers because it represents something rare, an encounter that was neither demanding nor superficial, yet profoundly authentic. You do not need to return, to explain, or to seek acknowledgement. The unconscious mind registers depth, coherence, and stability in ways that surface interactions cannot erase. What you leave behind is an imprint of possibility, a reflection of what intimacy might feel like when it is balanced, respectful, and grounded. In moving beyond no contact, you create a space in which both you and the avoidant individual are confronted with the potential for growth. They may not act on it, and they may not even admit it consciously, but the awareness remains. And in that quiet persistence of presence, your evolution becomes unforgettable, not because of absence alone, but because of the depth, integrity, and wholeness you embodied while stepping fully into your own life. Awareness of your own value transforms the dynamic in ways no pursuit can. When you cease to define yourself through someone else's availability, you reclaim the power that avoidance often obscures. Avoidant individuals are accustomed to relationships where the other person's attachment fills gaps they cannot face themselves. They expect reactivity, seeking, and dependency because it validates their sense of control. When you operate from awareness instead of need, you shift the energy entirely. This awareness is not arrogance, it is clarity. It allows you to engage with life fully, pursue your goals, nurture your relationships, and cultivate joy independently of their responses. The absence of anxious energy or compulsive attachment is profoundly unfamiliar to the avoidant psyche. It unsettles the expectation that closeness requires tension or pursuit. They may maintain their external detachment, but internally they register the contrast. Awareness communicates stability, strength, and self-respect without overt confrontation. It signals that your presence is not negotiable, yet it is complete, grounded, and whole on its own. Over time, these subtle cues embed themselves in memory. What lingers is not the drama of separation, the pleading for attention, or the attempts to provoke response. It is the quiet evidence of a person who could step fully into themselves, unshaken by the avoidance or withdrawal of another. This internal integrity leaves an indelible mark because it models something rarely encountered by someone whose instinct is to flee from intensity or vulnerability. You demonstrate that connection can exist without collapse, that presence does not require intrusion, and that emotional depth can coexist with composure. The avoidant may not consciously acknowledge this impact, but their unconscious mind registers it, returning to the memory in moments of reflection, hesitation, or curiosity. It becomes a touchstone, a reminder of what was possible when the other was whole. By embracing and radiating awareness of your own value, you go beyond the superficial measures of attachment and absence. You leave an enduring impression not through strategy, persuasion, or reaction, but through the lived reality of your own integrity and centeredness. In this way, memory and presence merge. They remember not simply because you disappeared, but because you evolved into someone impossible to overlook in the subtle, enduring architecture of the mind.